Timothy, right? Paul is writing this letter. He's writing the second time to his son in the ministry. Now, before we go into the letter, I want to talk a little bit about Timothy. If you flip over to Acts chapter 16, we discover how Paul, the apostle, meets this young man who happens to become a preacher and a protege of Paul, how he meets him. Acts chapter 16. And some of you may know Paul's story. Paul was a Pharisee, and he was also one who initially did not like the church. He thought that Christians were subversive and that they were trying to destroy Judaism. And so he went around killing Christians. Paul was actually a preacher who was a murderer. And it's interesting to me how people will shut you down because whatever, and God uses criminals. He does. I mean, look at David, biggest criminal on the planet. Not only was he a murderer, he was an adulterer and a conspirator. And God says he's a man after my own heart. God does not put the same kind of pressure on us that we put on each other. We're probably the only army that shoots its own soldiers. So Paul travels to the city called Derbe. Acts 16, verse 1. Paul went first to Derbe and then to Lystra, where there was a young disciple named Timothy. His mother was a Jewish believer, but his father was Greek. Timothy was well thought of by believers in Lystra and Iconium. So Paul wanted him to join them in their journey. In deference to the Jews of the area, he arranged for Timothy to be circumcised before they left, for everyone knew that his father was Greek. Then they went from town to town, instructing the believers to follow the decisions made by the apostles and the elders of Jerusalem. So the churches were strengthened in their faith and grew larger every day. So we find that God calls this man named Paul in Acts chapter 9 as he goes to Jerusalem to kill Christians. And he anoints him, he gives him a message, he makes him an apostle, and then he says, I want you to preach. And when he goes to this city called Derbe and Lystra, he meets this young man named Timothy. Timothy's probably 17, 18 years old. There's some debate as to how old he actually was. But let's just say he's between 17 and 20. And he's not been circumcised. Now, I don't know about you. But the Bible says that Paul, because he wanted to take Timothy with him, circumcised him. Now remember, they didn't have anesthetic in those days. They didn't have, Darvon, they didn't have, what's that stuff they did? Whatever. They didn't have morphine, okay? And Timothy submits to it. I don't know. But Paul understands that his role as a pastor leader is to train up other people. That part of his job is to invest in the lives of young men, to let them travel with him, to see the work of the ministry, so that, watch this, they don't get consumed with the glory and not understand the struggles. That for many of us, when we look at preachers, we look at leaders, what we see is what they do on Sunday. We don't realize that all throughout the week they're fighting battles. They're struggling against spiritual issues. They're being challenged. They're being opposed. They're being talked about, etc. What we see is the glamour, and what we pursue is the glamour. When in fact, one of the reasons it's important, I've taken Aunt with me on occasions, I've taken Elder Fred with me on occasion. Just recently, I had Scott teach a Bible study on Saturday, because the goal as a pastor and leader is to invest in the lives of the people around you so they can do the work of the ministry. Because ministries cannot grow when it is mono-focused. A ministry should never be successful just because the pastor is there. Because what happens when the pastor dies? And the truth of the matter is, we will die. And so what we see in the beginning of Paul's ministry is he understands his role in investing in the lives of people so that he can pass when he writes the letter to him in 2 Timothy, is because he put Timothy in a ministry. He left him in Ephesus. That's the first thing we see. The second thing we see is this. Verse 1 says that Timothy, right there, Timothy. His mother was Jewish and his father